Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we'll be looking at how do you use Asyncio, and in particular, how do we use Semaphore with Asyncio. So Asyncio is typically used when you want to run concurrent tasks like in parallel. If you want to do if you want to carry out tasks in parallel, you use Asyncio. It's sort of multi-threading, but a different module, right? Um, but the thing with Asyncio is you spin up parallel tasks, but you don't have control over how they run, right? Like how many of those tasks run. They run in the background in parallel. What Semaphore allows you to do is basically restrict the number of concurrent tasks that can run in the background or in parallel. So this might be useful, let's say when you're trying to fetch a URL and there's a rate limit, and if multiple parallel tasks run in parallel, you might be overburdening the network resource, or you might be hitting the rate limit. So this semaphore helps you to restrict the number of parallel concurrency, basically, right? So we'll go through a code example and take a look at how what it does and how do you use it, right? So um, I'm importing asyncio, which is part of the Python standard library. Then I have AIO HTTP. Basically, this is used to make asynchronous HTTP requests, right? You can use HTTPX if you want, but yeah. And then there's a time module. Now I have basically I have a main function, right? In the main function I take in URLs, right? A list of URLs, right? And then the maximum concurrent request. So maximum concurrent request is like number of requests I want to make in parallel here, right? Then initially initialize a semaphore, right, with a sync semaphore, and then pass it how many of these I want, right? And then uh, so you get a semaphore object. Then I do a sync with um, basically here I'm starting a client session instead of making a request. I initialize an AIO HTTP client session object, right? With I do with this, and then I'll be creating a number of parallel async IO tasks. So what you do is I go through each URL, right? For URL in URLs, and then I do an async IO create task. So each task basically is fetching the URL, right? So I have a function called fetch URL, which takes a URL and then it takes the semaphore, right? And a global, like the common session object, and then each of these tasks uh, create task has an option to, you can name that task. So I'm basically for each URL, I have this I here, right, which is just a number, right? So it tells me, okay, each of these is a separate task. So 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Number of URLs that I have. So here, basically, create task will give you a certain, and so I get a task object, and then I'm storing all of these task object in a fetch task list, right? So that I can later on use them. Now, when you create a task, it doesn't run in asyncio. It just creates a task, right? But you to run it, or to kick off the whole process, you do a syncio gather, await a syncio gather, and then I pass in the fetch task list here, right? And I get output as a result, right? So because fetch each for each of these, I'll have output in the result. So this is also a list. Then what I'm doing is I'm going through each of this. I'm printing what is the status. So right. So now let's look at the fetch URL function. So if I go to the fetch URL function, basically it takes a URL, semaphore, and a session, and it goes to this URL, and then it gets it. But the thing with semaphore is, if you do a sync with semaphore, you are basically restricting it. So at each point of time, you can have maximum number of semaphores that can run. So since we have max concurrent requests, you cannot have more than max concurrent request of tasks going on in parallel, right? So yeah, that how do you do that? You do a sync with semaphore, and then within this async block, whatever you do, it's a normal function that you do. So basically, what I'm doing is I get the current task and get name, right? So which task is getting this particular URL, right? And I get that name. You can do current task and get name, and then this since I have this session AIO HTTP session, which was passed in from here. I do a sync with session and I get the URL, right, and then the response, and then this is just to simulate some sort of a concurrency and latency, right? So I do a sleep here, and then from this response I do status, and then I'm printing. So basically here at before every task, right, I print that, acquiring semaphore, and then I print that finished getting the output, right, and then I'm returning whatever the URL and the status that I got from here. So basically it's a tuple that I return, and that's the same URL and status is being used here, right, when I iterate over this results object. Okay, results, which is a list. Now to put this all together, um, right, I have a main, right, I just to for this example I have a certain URLs, right, so it's all Google here, but you can have, let's say, a list of URLs which can be any number, right, and then I'm putting max concurrent is equal to 3, which basically means that only 3 async IO tasks can run simultaneously at the same time, right, so yeah, so that, and then I do a start time, and then basically async IO run, and then I'm calling that main function from there, right? So you pass the example URL and then the max concurrency, and then I printing the total time. Now let's see how this goes, right? So let's run this. Okay, let me open my terminal. Okay, so I have the virtual environment created, right? So let me pip install AIOHTTP, pip install AIOHTTP, should be installed right now. Okay, so this is already installed now. Let me run this. Python sync IO, right? Okay, so you see we get results and then we get output. But what I want to show you here is if we see this running, it starting synchronous fetching with semaphore. So basically with 3 concurrency. Now look at this. What happens is task 0 goes and does acquiring, right? And then it's basically is doing fetching, right? So similarly task 1, and then 0 1 and 2. So if you see here, you till these 3 tasks are completed, our fourth task is not running. So if you see here, we have the task number 0 which is completed, right, with status 200, and it is at that point of time where you have the fourth task starting. So you have this, right, and then you have the task 2 which basically finished again, right? So then again you have the fifth task running from here. Once you have, so in uh, as long as you have 3 tasks running, you cannot have a new task run, right? So when once finishes, a new starts up. So this is what happens here. All right, and it took around 2 seconds. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Thank you for watching this. I'll be posting regularly. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to talk about something else, and I'll be covering advanced topics in Python and machine learning and AI. Right. So see you again in the next video. Thank you very much. Thanks.